Cybernation Uncensored.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our wonderful broadcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome to
Greetings,
our wonderful...
programs. Good to see you. We've missed you.
And Happy New Year.
Oh, that too.
So we're entering. We're about to enter the late part of the initial corporate war, the shadow war, and starting to get into the hot war, right?
Oh yeah, the submarines are in the water, getting nasty with each other.
I believe right around the corner is supposed to be the truce between OTEC and Sino, and then the boys in black and Militech start duking it out. And we have a guest. Hey, Phil.
Hey, guys.
Hey, and here is Phil joining us once again.
Yes, indeed. Glad to be here. Sorry I'm late.
No worries.
We are glad to have you, pal.
We just started.
Yeah, you are just right on time. We didn't get to preamble you, but kind of did that yourself just now. So, everybody, it's Phil McCracken.
Indeed.
As always, I am Wisdom with our host, Will.
This is Mr.
Cybersmily.
Yep. Welcome, everybody. So you guys see any interesting films, cyberpunk related, since our last break?
I am watching the final season of The Expanse and being blown away on a moment by moment basis.
Oh, I would love to see that. I saw the first, I think it was the first 4 seasons.
It just gets better and better. Well, I say it gets better and better. Season 5 kind of slowed things down, but then it picked right back up, and it's leading up to what looks like is going to be a very satisfactory ending, which will be a nice change of pace.
I won't give you guys any spoilers.
Yeah, no spoilers. I'm not throwing out any spoilers.
I enjoyed it. There definitely was one thing that was kind of I don't know. I'm not going to spoil it. Never mind. Anyways,
I cannot wait. I mean, outside of the proto-molecule, and of course you could add that in there, it was everything I thought of when I think of cyberpunk in space.
Yeah, yes. I mean, it's the most perfect example of cyberpunk in space out there, because it takes things. Well, I say that, but then there's artificial gravity, which fucks everything up. It's just hard to escape that really. You kind of have to have that, because no TV show is going to have the budget for people in space to be constantly floating around. They do it enough on The Expanse to remind you that it is artificial gravity. Shit does happen. That's my only complaint, and it's like I said, it's not even really a valid complaint because we're constrained by the budgets of television.
Actually, the artificial gravity is interesting because it looks like artificial gravity because everyone's standing on the floor, but there are definitely
but they got the magnetic boots. They've got
those little
rings.
Scenes. And if you also notice how everybody has their hair tied up when they're in space.
Yeah, you got to.
So I think there's not necessarily artificial gravity. I think it's just a perception that they kind of mask in a very subtle way.
Well, didn't they do artificial gravity by using thrust? I mean, yeah, you got the torus rings, but when the ship was in motion, didn't they use that to create some sort of false gravity?
They do. They do.
Yep.
Like there's, like I said, they address it, which is more than like 99% of shows out there do.
Oh yeah.
For most shows, the only time you ever are reminded that they're in space and that there's no gravity is as a plot device.
Yeah, they just got their butts kicked and something went offline and everybody starts floating.
Yeah, and it's almost immediately fixed and blah. Like it lasts a couple of seconds and there's no real consequences. Whereas anytime they lose gravity on the Expanse, like shit's flying everywhere and people are getting like massively injured from debris and stuff. The space battles in the Expanse are so good.
Yep.
Uh,
There's actually two things I've seen. Not only did I see The Expanse, but in addition to that, I watched the movie Anon. Basically, it's a detective story. However, it's kind of very cyberpunk in that everyone has a recording device in their heads. So
huh.
basically, cops can solve mysteries by looking at your recordings, which to me opens a whole ball of wax around privacy and the whole Big Brother, because now cops can just basically take recordings from your head and see exactly what you did, when you did it, and how you did it. But there is a small segment of population who are able to mask and kind of like hackers, in which they erase it. So the premise of the story is, there's murders that are happening, and the cops have no leads as to who's doing it because the killer hijacks the person's signal. So it kind of like Strange Days,
Nice.
but it was an interesting movie. I think it's on Netflix. And of course, the other cyberpunk related movie was The Matrix 4, which I enjoyed. I wouldn't say it was the best movie I've ever seen, but it was enjoyable.
I mean, we're cyberpunk fans. We have pretty low expectations sometimes. Um, I haven't seen The Matrix 4 yet. I don't really want to. I'm not really sure why it got made.
I'll see, but
it's going to be seen as somewhat of a travesty, but I'm actually not a great big fan of The Matrix. Visually, I love it, but I think it's probably the most overrated cyberpunk media out there. Yeah, I'm probably gonna get some hate on that, but that's just how I feel.
well, I'm gonna see The Matrix 4 simply out of morbid curiosity. There is no like driving desire to, hey, I want to really go see this movie because I think it's going to be so awesome. I want to see how much of a train wreck it is.
I didn't
That's
think it
just
was
me.
that big of a train wreck.
Well, I don't know. I mean, and that's
And again, everyone's has different opinions on what they watch, right? Like, there's some movies, like, I know my brother hated The Godfather. And to me, I'm like, how can you hate that masterpiece? So, everyone has different
I fall
tastes.
asleep every time I watch it, and that's somebody who loves The Godfather. But man, it's a slow burn.
Yeah.
It is. I'm not going to say it's the most overrated movie ever, but it is overrated. People call it a perfect movie, but it's not a perfect movie. In my eyes, a perfect movie is something everybody can watch.
that's
Raiders
a,
of the Lost Ark is a perfect movie. The original Richard Donner Superman is a perfect movie. Are they the most intellectually stimulating movies out there? No, but everybody can watch them and everybody can enjoy them. That's a perfect movie to me. Godfather's great, but I'll tell you what I enjoy watching more: Scarface, Goodfellas, movies where it doesn't move along at a snail's pace.
mm.
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna get hate mail for that
Not from me. You know, everyone has the right to be wrong.
too.
That is
You
true.
know, even when I'm wrong, I'm right. So there you
Yeah,
So,
once I thought I was mistaken.
go.
so since our last podcast, there hasn't been too much from Altor Surian. I know we're always trying to get some DLCs going, but I don't think there
think
was too many that happened over the vacation.
not for us. I think they
Yeah.
got something for The Witcher.
All right.
Um, I mean, honestly, unless it's as horrible as it is to say, with this holiday season, unless it had to do with Cyberpunk itself, I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. Um, but yeah, I think they did something with The Witcher, especially to coincide with the TV series on Netflix getting its second season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't recall seeing anything else.
Yep.
Yeah,
So,
it's been kind of overall.
Yeah,
and
yeah, this
then,
month has really passed very quickly.
yeah. I have a. It seemed like 2021 was kind of the longest yet shortest years of my life.
Yeah, the days dragged, but I don't remember any of it.
Yeah. So, it was an interesting year. So, from what I hear in the rumor mill around Cyberpunk 2077, is patch 1.5 might be around the corner, possibly
Mm-hmm.
at late February, early March, is the rumor.
I can. All right. Speaking of 2077, over this break, I acquired a PS5, and there's a great big difference between playing Cyberpunk 2077 on PS4 and PS5. I it's they should have sent a poet. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I saved my money when I heard that that game was coming up to buy the best and latest machine so I could play it. But of course,
Oh,
with
hey,
the
Capricious.
hey, Happy New Year's,
Sorry,
man.
Capricious Nature
Yeah,
is one of our regular listeners, and he just popped up in the chat. So give him a shout.
yeah. Well, he's a lurker.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's according to rumor because I guess CD Projekt Red has been pushing out some test code to I think Steam, which usually
Huh.
indicates that within the next month and a half, the expectation
Yeah.
is the patch is coming out, and supposedly it's going to be a big one. I know there's rumors saying what's going to be in it, but a lot of them is just hearsay and hopeful. So, to me, I love how certain clickbaiters try to say they know exactly what's going to be coming out when God's honest truth, they really don't. But we'll
Well,
see.
I mean, there's always some guy out there who tries to monetize everything that goes on. Clickbait bullshit. I don't even remember his name, but there's a dude who does that for GTA 5 who just will any rumor that pops up, no matter how just like off the cuff remark, unsubstantiated bullshit, he will make a 20-minute video about it. I'm not gonna dignify him by repeating his name, but
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, there's no such thing as bad press, so you don't want to give any names.
yeah. Uh, so there's always going to be somebody who's going to throw that kind of stuff out there.
Yep. And I don't know when, but according to various sources, this is the year in which Cyberpunk Edgerunners, the anime, is coming to Netflix. Hopefully it's sooner than later.
That.
It's so crazy to me. I didn't think we'd ever be getting official Cyberpunk comics, but now we're getting an anime. Like that's full circle for me. It was my love of anime that got me into playing Cyberpunk in the first place. Like, the people that I originally played Cyberpunk with, I knew because I was introducing them to anime at the time. It was at the Kansas City Art Institute way back in 1990. I had a friend who was going there, and I'd show up with my big box of anime. We'd watch it, and then they invited me to come play Cyberpunk with them. So for that, it's full circle for me. Now there's a Cyberpunk anime, and it's all my favorite things in one.
Now if we only can get more novels coming out of our Talsorian.
What do you mean more novels? There were no novels. The Hollow Man and Ravagers? I don't know what you're talking about. Those don't exist. No. No, they do exist, and I own them. And
I think we all do. And that's alone.
yeah. I mean,
Something is better than nothing, right?
something is better. Well, and then you hear the names Bite Boy and Bite Girl, and you're just. I get it. It's just when those novels first came out, I was so excited to get my hands on them. And then it was like the author had never actually picked up a cyberpunk book in his life.
I too was excited because there were like a list of Shadowrun novels, and
huge list.
And since I didn't like Shadowrun, it was a great pleasure for me to finally get some cyberpunk novels.
Oh,
and as you said, this is what you give me.
It's so painful. There's like 100 Shadowrun books. There's like 300,000 D&D novels out there, plus every other fantasy book that basically is a D&D book. Hell, Warhammer's had novels. Finally, we got some cyberpunk stuff, and oh my god. I mean, God bless Stephen Barnes. He did his best, but that is the author. Yeah. If not, I apologize. But I think that's his name. Yeah, I try not to really bad talk any of the official product, but they were not good.
Right. So speaking of official products, kind of gives us a segue into what our tonight's topic or our episode's topic is going to be about. We're going to try to every so often do kind of an in-depth review, analysis of the various Altarsorian books that are out there. I know with we've already done our take on Cyberpunk Red, but since I think the three of us are kind of old school cyberpunks, we're going to go with what already exists, and I think it is well within the community that this particular book is a must-have, whether you're doing Cyberpunk Red or still playing Cyberpunk 2020, and that is Listen Up, You Primitive Screwheads.
Yes.
I mean, it is the best book on running a game I've ever read. If you're going to GM a game, there are very few books that I consider to be must read. There is Robin Law's Guide to Good Game Mastering. There are the two Suppressed Transmission books by and my brain just shut down. Come on, guys, help me out here.
I can't help you out, man. The only book I've
Sadly,
read about how to run or be a GM is Listen Up, You Primitive Screwheads.
And
Yeah.
then number one is Listen Up, You Primitive Screwheads.
I think I
It's just
have Dungeon Mastering or Dungeon Mastering for Idiots.
that's not bad. That's I mean, if you're really starting out, if you've never tried to run a game before, I would recommend that. But yeah.
Yeah, so for those who have yet to read the book or have yet to dive into it, basically it's a book with several different authors, cyberpunk authors. Sorry, several different cyberpunk GM players.
Kenneth Heat. That's his name. Kenneth Heat. My bad. I apologize
Heat.
for throwing that in, but I was
No
gonna go
worries.
crazy.
Who back in the day played cyberpunk. Probably have, I believe, some of their credits are they've written some game supplements. So the book is, of course, Mike Pondsmith has a few articles in it. You have Spike, or Ross Wynn.
My man Ross Wynn.
He also gives some pretty thorough advice throughout the book. Benjamin Wright is another author. I think he.
I mean, he goes back to the early days of like he is Cyberpunk 2020 royalty. He's been in it I want to say almost as long as Mike.
Right.
Craig Sheely.
Yep, Eric.
Yeah. I mean, the book is written by a cornucopia of longtime RTG staff and people who were just part of like Mike's gaming group, I think. I mean, these guys know what they're talking about. It's the advice they give. The book is written for Cyberpunk 2020, obviously, and that's what they talk about the most. But the advice that they give can be applied to any game you run.
And that is evidence if you put the name out there in different fan groups. I've actually seen people who don't even play Cyberpunk saying this is a great GM's guide.
It is. And it should be
outside
it should be placed on a pedestal. It really should.
Yep. So let's start diving into it. So the first chapter is about running long-term campaigns. And
that is my bread and butter.
Yes, that's pretty much what I did. And basically, 4 of those authors put in their input. So Craig, Benjamin, Eric, and Ross all have various comments on how to basically form a long-term campaign. And I especially liked Benjamin's approach and the 7 steps, as he called it, to a successful saga.
I agree 100%. Benjamin approaches the game in a very similar manner to the way I do. So we seem fairly simpatico on that nature. In particular, his idea of his advice on being, like I've talked about it before, with LifePath and the GM being an active participant in LifePath, and using LifePath as a springboard for so many other campaign ideas and plot hooks and just personality for the character and the campaign itself.
Indeed.
Yeah, and I mean, think. Go ahead.
My most, well, I can't say famous. It's only famous among 3 people. It was a 14-hour game that I ran, and it was all randomly generated from their life path.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, it works. You can run an entire campaign using nothing but life path, all your NPCs, everything. Life path is probably the best tool I've ever. I mean, 40 years or 30 years ago now, they created LifePath, and it's still, as far as I'm concerned, the best tool for fleshing out a character or a campaign. I've used it for Dungeons and Dragons. I've used it for Warhammer. Fantasy. I've used it for just about anything you could run. I've used it for Star Wars, for James Bond. The idea, I mean, granted, I created Interlock Unlimited to be a generic system that allowed you to run all this kind of stuff. But even if I'm just using the life path from the generic Interlock Unlimited set, it just helps me flesh out the character and get to know them and like give them a personality beyond some 14-page backstory of bullshit that no GM is ever going to read.
Yeah. And between all the authors, I mean, some of the takeaways I got from this chapter was, when Benjamin Wright wrote maintenance.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is so integral to a long-term campaign. Because right now I'm going on a year and a half with my current Cyberpunk game. And still there's so much from the players' life paths that still need to be done. And also, not only that, but all the stuff they have done so far. And how, there's always consequences and there's always repercussions towards anyone's actions, good or bad, right? And from a maintenance point of view is always trying to keep that going. And also making sure that when you, as a GM, when you think about, for example, bringing some corporate to start messing around with the party, what's the motivation behind it? And for example, with the campaign I'm running right now, the team hit a facility. They don't know who the true owners of that facility were, and the true owners are kind of hunting them down in the background, which is yet to be quite obvious to them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of part of that keeping the maintenance going of, are they slipping up to allow this corporation to find out who they are and find their location? And, that's as a GM, when you're always plotting out these, intricate plots, let's just say, of a corporation trying to get back at this unknown edge runner group who screwed them or did something. How well did the players cover their tracks, and how well are they still covering their tracks? So, to me, that one piece of advice with maintenance is you always want to keep with a long-term campaign.
It's hard. He taught that in the next chapter, or not next chapter, but the next guy who, after Benjamin, talks is Eric Hesser, and he talks about introducing NPCs who are going to play major roles throughout the campaign. And it's hard to create an enemy NPC like an arch enemy type for the NPC.
You think so?
I do, because it's not hard to create somebody who's going to be behind the scenes, like the mastermind villain. It's not hard to create that. Anything, though, that's going to ever confront the PCs, it's hard to do that without a lot of GM hand-waving, because the first reaction of the PCs is always going to be to kill that guy at all costs.
Well,
and that's okay. That just means you got to get clever with it. Just
well,
yeah.
In my latest scenario, they have met their, I don't know if he's going to be an arch enemy or whatever, but they met the NPC who's going to be the bane of their existence for a little bit. And when they met him, they wanted to, kill him, but he was surrounded by like 100 of his people. And when they go looking for him again, he never stays in the same place twice. So, hey, we want to get this guy. Oh, he's not here anymore. So they don't like him. He doesn't like them. He's probably going to get them framed for killing somebody, but I'll let that play out, see if they can get our way out of that. But we have the enemy NPC who is aware of them. They are aware of him. They know what they want from him, but can't get to him. And he doesn't have a big castle with guards and everything like that. He does, but it's mobile. So yeah, you want to kill him, but find him from today and tomorrow. Good luck.
Yep.
It's the physical, like I said, you can introduce a mastermind who's always going to be thinking 2 steps ahead of the players. Like that's not very difficult. But to create the guy who's actually going to go toe to toe with them, like I ran a martial arts campaign, and it was hard for me to keep a big baddie that was threatening to the players, like as a recurring villain, because they just tended to players are fucking ruthless. No matter how heroic they try and make their characters, at the end of the day, it's the players, and they're ruthless. They kill their enemies and
murder hobos.
And it's hard to hand wave the bad guy escaping after being defeated or stopped or whatever without it feeling cliche or ham-fisted.
I was able to successfully do that once. There is a player who's looking for his girlfriend that some dude stole from him. Not physically stole, actually won her affection.
Nice.
And the guy wants to track her down because he's sure this guy's an asshole. He wants to get his girl back, win her back. And when he finds her, she's like a living doll. She has this implant thing on the side of her head. The guy realized, I don't really love her. I just like her body. Well, that's all I'm keeping. So this implant is not only keeping her a doll, it's also linked to him. So anything they do to him affects her.
Oh, damn, that's sneaky.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, you can punch me in the nose and she's going to feel it, and you could kill me and she'll die, and
Yeah, I like that. I might end up stealing that, just so you know.
Oh, please do.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a way to have my NPC be very hated but untouchable.
Yeah, that's elegant and beautiful. I like that. That's a good solution right there.
Well, the other mechanism I use, and I've used in the past, when I do not want a particular NPC killed, right? Oftentimes, it might be in a situation where, the team is raiding a facility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have them start hearing sirens, or they hear a bunch of AVs starting to land. That usually gets the party to be like, shit, I don't have time to really deal with this guy. I got to get out of here. And put the pressure on the player to now say, okay, at first you thought this was you attacking. Now it's you trying to get out alive. Or always have the meeting with that NPC in a place that the party can't really kill them, right? You're in a restaurant.
Well, I mean, that all
weapons.
works, but it's. I was talking about more along the lines of, this guy's a great big physical guy who wants to, get in a fist fight with somebody, and I don't know. I have one of my main in personal meat space players. One of the main guys that I've played with for years now is just the single luckiest roller I've ever seen. And
I've had those.
Oh my God, it's so frustrating. Every time I introduce the big baddie, like there was a prison game where, killing was, you get like a prison gladiator pit where you couldn't kill the guy, but yeah, you beat him to the point of maiming him. and he went up against the champion and took him out the first hit. Like, just he critical hit, critical hit, critical hit. I've watched that dude on more than one occasion in front of my eyes roll 3 10s in a row.
Yeah.
I've
had players like that.
I've made him switch out dice. Nothing works. I've made him. I created dice trays just in case there was any kind of trickery that he was doing under the table. The guy drives me crazy.
Or you have the player who, for whatever reason, and you know it's a normal dice and it's just his luck, will always like roll 10s for the hits and always roll 1s for locations.
Oh yeah. And meanwhile, I personally, when I'm playing, am the opposite. I can't. If it's something stupid, I'll roll a 10 after a 10 after a 10. But the minute it becomes important, and like my character's life or anybody else's life relies on the die roll, I'm gonna fail. I'm gonna fumble. I'm gonna fail. I'm gonna fumble. It drives me crazy.
All right, let's rein this in a little more and get back to our analysis of Listen Up, You Pervo Screwheads. So, what other parts of this particular chapter of running a long-term campaign did you really jumped out to you? 2 other sections I really liked were show the player what it means to be talented. I've done that with NPCs, and the players get a hint of how to start playing their character. And then the other section was start out with a big bang, right? Which is really start a campaign with either a firefight or some other instant in which, there is tons of actions.
Very much so on the first one. Showing them what it means to be talented. I mean, if your character's professionals, let them experience what it's like to be a professional. Especially if they're beginning, you're going to have to hold their hands to show them what it's like to be their character. Because, I mean, they may have a concept in the back of their head, but they might not know how to make that come out in play, especially if they don't know how to play in the first place, or they're new to the genre. They might be just be shy. But like Cyberpunk places a whole lot of importance on reputation and style. Like number one, style over substance. So sometimes as a GM, you're going to have to hold their hands through that at the beginning. Let them know that if they're a high level solo, they've got some renown. They've got to act the part even when they're not acting the part. If they've got a fixer, that guy has always got to be on top of everything. They got to know everybody. They got to have a list of contacts in their back pocket that lets them get a hold of whoever they need to get a hold of for whatever situation arises.
And that's why step 4, finding players, because a lot of that can be either damped down or tapped down, or the problem eliminated entirely if you've chosen the right players. They either have a knowledge of the game or the genre. You don't have to have a knowledge of the game itself exactly.
Oh no, that's very true.
Yeah, that's why I say step 4 is my favorite, because that handles so much of the other stuff. You've chosen these guys personally, or gals. You know that.
However, go ahead. Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize.
That was just my little insert.
The only problem with step 4, the only problem with being able to choose your players like that is you might, and we run into this a lot. Cyberpunk, especially in this day and age, I mean, sure, there's lots of new players out there for Red, but Cyberpunk 2020, it's harder and harder and harder to find people with experience who know how to play the game, who understand the genre. And if you're pulling from, for me, it's always been almost harder to pull people in from other games than it is to just grab brand new players. Because if you pull them in from other games, like if you pull a Dungeons and Dragons player into Cyberpunk, there is a severe period of adjustment. Like some of them never get their heads wrapped around it. It's a different philosophy of playing.
Yeah, and if you have those type of players, that can always be a problem because they're like, well, this isn't how this, the system I'm normally used to works. Oh, this is, we'll critique the game mechanics consistently. And I think it's also a little bit of a maturity on the players, to the point where eventually you would hope that certain people who do play games, and at least I would say I don't know what it's like in today's game scene, but back in the 80s and 90s when I was a prime gamer, new games were always like, hey, let's try this, hey, let's try that. So there was always an excitement of trying new systems, where I think once you're established into a system, or that's the only system you want to play, you start having a severe blockage to learn new things. And a player like that cannot disrupt the game, because they will consistently critique, oh, why can't I do this? Or why is that
God
the
knows,
way it is?
God knows I've been guilty of that myself in reverse, because I started out with my first real role-playing love being Cyberpunk. When I go and play any other game and I can't one-shot kill somebody, it irks me. No matter how creative I get, it just that in Cyberpunk, if you get creative, if you're like, I'm going to stab that dude right in the ear, that has an effect. That you can take him out doing that. And if you play Dungeons and Dragons, you can't one-shot somebody.
Yeah, you can stab them in the air a couple of times, and they're like, "Huh? What?
There's no rules for it. There's no set aside for like attacking an opponent's like weak spots. A groin kick might as well be a punch in the arm. It's the classic joke of you can fill an opponent with arrows as long as they've still got one hit point left. They're fighting at full strength.
Yeah, and I think some of this topic is also covered in a later chapter around GM control and power players.
Yes.
I apologize.
No worries.
It's my nature, guys. To the listeners
I kind of
out there,
diverted it too.
I rant.
We all are going to rant, but I think this first chapter is definitely a must-read. From all the authors who publish their critiques, because I think there's just different approaches to long campaigns, and I think you can pick and choose some of the ideas to make it fit and work for your particular campaign. Anything else you guys want to cover in this particular chapter?
Pay attention to your players. It's not on the it's not one of the steps, but it is in there. Who is your leader type? Who is the comedian? Who is the guy who's just going to be a pain in the butt?
Yeah, I think
watch.
Eric Heiser has a blurb about pay close attention during gameplay and watch your players.
That's one of my favorite things, because a lot of GMs will have an idea and just run with this idea. It doesn't matter who you're running with or running over or anything. It's like, this is the idea I have. And
it doesn't matter if the characters in the game are suited to that idea or not.
Exactly, and that's why watching the players, in my opinion, is so crucial, because it may be too highbrow for them, or it may be too lowbrow for them, and you have to adjust accordingly. But if you're not watching them, you'll never figure that out.
I look at it like this, and watching your players, I agree with you. It's so very important. Getting on the same page as your players, having your players be on the same page as you. We talk about that a lot. you can have your idea for the overall theme of the game, and Ross Wynn, picking a theme, his advice in this chapter is fantastic. You pick a theme for the game, but at the same time, you have to change. You have to change what the game is going to be based on the characters your players are running. I liken it to, all right, you've got a movie script, and then you cast the actors, and depending on the actors, your movie's not going to be the same thing. If you wrote this part for Steve McQueen, and then for some reason Steve McQueen's not going to be available, so you're like, I'm going to go with Burt Reynolds. Suddenly, that's a completely different movie. Like they're not going to play the role the same way. You went from it being a fairly serious movie to it being kind of like a goofy action comedy, and it's going to be that way with players and the characters that they run. Yep. You got to pay attention to that.
Good analogy.
Yeah, if you want to run a super dark, super serious, gritty campaign, you don't want players that are gonna be goofy and funny. You couldn't tell Arkham Asylum with Justice League International with those characters. It had to be the Grant Morrison Batman, the dark, gritty Batman. If you bring in the Keith Giffen and J.M. DeMatteis Justice League, that doesn't work. That story is not the same anymore.
Right.
So yeah.
As that military term, no battle planning survived the first encounter with the enemy.
That's very true.
So no story that you write as a GM is ever going to stay the same once you've introduced your player characters into it.
Yeah.
Because just you said, writing for Steve McQueen and Burt Reynolds gets it. It goes from being, this thing over here to Smokey and the Bandit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's...
Or the exact analogy I was going for, Cannonball Run. Cannonball Run was originally written to star Steve McQueen. It was going to be a very serious road race movie.
Really?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just watched a documentary on it last night. It's still fresh in the brain.
Yeah, I was going to do a kind of a Cannonball Run campaign, but the guy I was going to write it with unfortunately passed away. But that's a story for another date.
That is a story for another day. I am sorry to hear that.
Oh, thanks.
All right. Getting back to Listen Up, You Pruners Screwheads, we're going to move on to Chapter 2, which is Style and Atmosphere. And I think this chapter tries to get you into the mindset of what the 80s, 90s future of tech would look like. It's definitely worth reading. For me, I didn't get a lot of takeaways from this chapter. I don't know about you other two.
I got a lot from it because while it's wrapped in the trappings of, hey, this is what cyberpunk looks like to us. Cyberpunk is this 80s, 90s thing because it was written in the 80s and 90s. And that's just what cyberpunk looked like back then. And cyberpunk looked like Blade Runner and Total Recall. That's just the way it was. And the net looked like Lawnmower Man. That's just the way it was. That's what it looked like in the 90s. So that's the trappings that they used to try to describe it. But what they're saying is, include that style. Don't let your players forget that this is the world that their game is taking place in. Don't forget to, pepper your descriptions with these futuristic things, both culturally and technology-wise, to let them know that while the world is familiar, it's not the same. It's just different enough to be exotic, as it were. Take them just a little bit out of their comfort zone and yes, style is important. Style is everything in cyberpunk, and that has to be expressed in the world that you build and the examples that you give of what's happening around the character, the setting, the atmosphere. We've talked about music and how, if you're going to use music in a cyberpunk campaign, don't play fucking the rock and roll bullshit that everybody's familiar with. Play something weird that nobody's ever heard. Put them on edge a little bit. It doesn't mean it has to be bad music. It doesn't mean it has to be good music. It just means it has to be different. You have to mix it up. Throw them the unfamiliar.
Yeah, and I think I forget which later chapter it was. Maybe chapter 8. Spike goes into music styles and film styles around campaigns. So.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that because it gives the example of are you going to run an anime style game? Is everybody going to be leaping off the top of tall buildings and
I think
throwing stars? I like running, as they call it, cinema verite. I try to keep it as realistic as possible as you can for a role playing game. So that's what I took out of that section. It's like, okay, so this is my style. I never had a name for it before, but after reading "Listen Up, You Primitive Screwheads," I now had a name for it.
Yeah. I can't wait till we get to that chapter. Yeah, it's. I've got a lot to say about that stuff.
Yeah, and I think chapter 2 is one of the shorter chapters. I mean, it's definitely worth a read.
Yeah, it's worth reading. It's definitely going to give you. Ross goes into some really fantastic advice in this chapter, but like I said, it's all about atmosphere and creating the feeling you want to bestow upon your players. Say, like when you describe an NPC, be sure to throw in like a piece of cyber or maybe like a glow tattoo, some weird colored hair. Maybe he's wearing a bulletproof vest as a fashion accessory. Just something to let them know that this isn't like just right now today.
Yep.
Right.
So moving on to chapter 3, we got GM control and power player problems.
This is the chapter
that has a lot of contradiction.
I love this book, but this chapter here always presents a problem for me. And I've spoken about it at length in the past. I'm going to speak about it again today. I'm going to let you guys go first, but
okay.
I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, the main part I like is Eric Heisman's articles on what is a power player versus what is not a power player, and then he goes into the different types of power players and gives you an example of them. He gives you 3 ways to handle them. One is steering, right, which is how can you get that power player not to do what he's doing, right? The next is stopping, trying to stop that power player from doing what he's doing. And then finally the section of neutralizing, which is basically taking that player and making that player's character worthless, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's great advice of how to, there's always steps of escalation, right? So you want to try to be reasonable at the first step and continue doing it. And now, granted, I think back in the day, gamers really didn't have a lot of social skills in which they would confront a player and say, listen, man, you're screwing up my game. Can you please stop? Person to person, adult to adult, or whatever. Just let's play this game, have fun with it. I get your opinion.
In addition, it comes from this was still written in the early days, in the 90s. It was written mid 90s, early 90s, when everything was still Dungeons and Dragons was still king, and other philosophies of gaming were only just beginning to take off. So it was very much still like,
XP repeat.
yeah, and adversarial GMs were the norm. Uh, this chapter presents such a problem. This is there are parts of this that I'll even Ross and Benjamin, who I typically agree with everything about, there are parts that they write in here that I look at and kind of roll my eyes at. And I love them both. Like Benjamin and Ross are fantastic people. Their advice on games and their contribution to games has influenced almost my every step. But I don't like this chapter of the book. I don't like the concept of adversarial GMing. It bothers me. It's always bothered me. And on the surface, this chapter is great fun to read. It's hilarious. Pardon me. It's hilarious. Mike's take on it is like
Well, Mike's chapter is he has a whole chapter to himself on how to basically screw with.
Yeah, but it's basically the extension of this chapter.
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, we might as well talk about both of them at the same time because it's the same philosophy. This is more the preamble to Mike's chapter. My philosophy is, and I get it. I get the understanding that, like you said, this was written at a time when gamers' social skills were not at the height. But looking back, every single problem that these players have, if you've got a problem player, you communicate that. You don't. You do it out of game. You step back and say, "Hey, you're being a problem. You need to get on the same page as everybody else, so everybody else can have fun."
Well,
you'll have more fun too.
I see that, right? So there's a difference between a problem player and a problem character, right?
Sure.
And I think this chapter kind of blends the two too much. And I think the problem character, some of the advice in here kind of can apply to a character. And I think some of the solutions here can make great storytelling, right? So, for example, I think is it Charlie Wong? Yeah, Charlie Wong. When he talks about disabling, drug addiction, sabotage wear, bounties, no backup.
Yeah, all that is positive, good stuff.
So some of that you could take as adversarial GM. Why are you doing this?
Actions having consequences isn't. I don't take that as adversarial GMing. However, there's the advice that the players can never rest. That too many GMs took that as gospel.
Right.
I don't agree with that. The whole point of you doing of your player doing these jobs is to achieve a level of comfort. That's the reason anybody goes to any job. And if they never achieve any level of comfort, why wouldn't they just, at that point, if they're not getting any further ahead in life than they would if they were working at 7-Eleven, why wouldn't they just work at 7-Eleven?
I get you. If you make it too hard and too dark, what's the point?
Yeah. They got a car, blow it up. They got gear in a stash somewhere, have it stolen every time.
Yeah, but this chapter is not all about that,
I know, but it creates that problem that so many GMs take that as gospel. This is the way it's supposed to be done. Players can never have anything. Everybody in their life is going to betray them, and it just becomes ridiculous and cliche. And that's not how relationships work.
Yeah, and there, of course, there's always that fine line, because if you take that approach as a GM, sooner or later you're not going to have any players anymore.
Yeah.
How you introduce adversarial life to the character, right, is different than it takes some finesse to do that, as opposed to yeah, to your point, Mike's advice, and again, that's a different chapter, is very, very adversarial, very, and again,
Yeah, it's very
his
much
motto
GM
is
versus player.
yeah, he is definitely a guy who loves that, because his catchphrase is, "I'm Mike Pondsmith and I killed your cyberpunk character."
Yeah, it giving out T-shirts with that and all that, which I mean that's great. That's Mike's thing. I am very much not that.
Guys, approach those power gamers who are murder hobos, gun bunnies, hack and slashers. I like, the whole money aspect of it. Hey, you can be a hack and slasher, but by the time you finish paying for your collateral damage, even if you don't get arrested, you've got no money because you couldn't control your destructive habits.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean maintenance on your gear, that shit costs money. If you're constantly crashing your car, you got to hell. If you just use your car in a crime, you got to replace that shit. If you use your gun in a crime, you got to replace that shit. Of course, if you use your own personal gun in a crime, you're kind of stupid anyway. Like if that's a registered weapon. But if you're working as a bodyguard or something like that, you have to have registered weapons. You have to carry those around on you. So it becomes a fine line of that. Like, which gun am I carrying with me today? But this idea that nothing you do ever matters, I guess, again, if you're running like convention style one shot games, I guess that kind of makes sense. But if you're running a long-term game, yeah, you're going to lose players left and right.
But this chapter isn't just about how to screw with players, right? It talks about certain players who try to take advantage of the game, right? So, and there's various examples of it, like where Ross writes about money, and he talks about reputation, and he goes into items, the legality of certain items, the black market items, and the cost of that, because there's always going to be a player, well, this is the listed price and it should be available because it's in the book, and it's like, okay, if you actually read the description, this is military tech that is very scarce, and it's
ridiculously rare. You're not gonna fucking find this at the Walmart. It's not gonna happen.
Right, and so the chapter isn't necessarily trying to play more of an adversarial role. This chapter is more of players who try to take advantage of the system, and as a GM, how do you control that?
Right.
I think Benjamin gets into tech, and the mythology of what tech means, and he sets different levels, to the point of the last level is fantasy tech that really has no bearing in reality and should never be introduced
Star
into
Wars,
the game.
Star Trek bullshit.
Right. So, to me, from my takeaway of this particular chapter, and again, the adversarial GM, there are definitely chapters in here that get into that. And even in this chapter where Eric says, he gives the 3 levels of how to screw with a player, right? You want to steer them away from it. You want to try to stop them from doing it. And then the final step is to be adversarial and just start screwing with them, right? So I wouldn't say this chapter is completely about adversarial. And I completely agree with your point, is you don't want to, when you're running a game, you don't want to constantly be, you don't want to play the game as it's GM versus the players, right?
Right.
That is not the type of game that will have any type of long-term success. And yes, at conventions, it can work.
Yeah, I mean, I won't. I won't play under an adversarial GM. That just holds zero interest for me. I realize some people take that as a point of pride, like this GM is known for killing all his players, like total party kills, blah blah blah. Like that doesn't sound like fun to me in the slightest.
And that doesn't impress me because, okay, the players only have what's on their character sheet as attack or defense. That's it. You literally have the entire game universe. So it's like kicking a puppy. Oh, I've got more strength and power than you do, so I can kill your character. Okay.
Right.
Was it hard
Yeah,
for
I
you?
mean, you can drop a rock on my head from orbit out of nowhere. That doesn't make you a good GM. That makes you a dick.
Right.
That makes you the guy that whose table I'm never coming back to.
And I think there's probably 2 games that I know of that an adversarial GM can thrive. One is Paranoia, because
That's a different animal altogether, though. But yeah, Paranoia, that works.
I think Paranoia, that completely works. Call of Cthulhu kind of works.
I don't know.
Because if you ever played it, it's usually, if the players are not smart, yeah, you're going to die. But I think those are the 2 game systems.
Call of Cthulhu's
you could
its
see.
own philosophy in gaming like that, where I don't know if I would really consider. I don't know if I would really consider the GM to be adversarial in Call of Cthulhu, unless they're just completely being a dick.
Mm. True.
But that's really the thing is, I mean, an adversarial GM, I'm just always going to consider a dick. Like, yeah, that's.
I like the method of control of like money, and as you mentioned, Cybersmily, reputation. I had a character once who was supposed to go protect this like little old man who ran a bistro, and yeah, he killed the bad guys who were sorry, pardon my English, who were plaguing this man. He got rid of all of them. He also destroyed the bistro at the same time. So after that, he didn't get another protection contract for a lot of sessions. No one would touch him.
If your kid's supposed to be if your character's supposed to be a bodyguard for some kid going to school, and they end up like slaughtering like 30 people in front of the kid, you're never getting a job again. It's not going to happen. Hell, if you do so much as like show up to the wrong event dressed poorly, you may not see employment for a while. Reputation is important in cyberpunk. At the same time, if you are like a professional assassin, do you really want that high reputation? I mean, sure, you want your work to be known, but you don't personally want to be known. You don't want to be recognized anywhere you go.
Yep. Right, and that's where power gamer, I guess, wouldn't be looked at as a bad thing, because you're doing this whole thing in secret and you want to be able to get rid of your adversary, but where you come in to control the power player is, hey, you want to have this big piece of armor and this big gun. It's going to be kind of hard to be stealthy with all that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Like, there are more than enough ways to curb gaming problems in game without resorting to being a dick. Yeah, GM fuckery.
Yep. And I currently in my campaign have 2 characters who decided certain stats were dump stats, right? So they only have a 1 in. One character uses
holy shit
as a dump stat was their luck. So anytime I decide to make a luck roll, like, hey guys, or you're trying to do something like, what's the, just like per chance, like if something might happen, he would question that, and I'm like, okay, usually I say, okay, roll a d10, roll it equal or below your luck. And of course this guy has a 1. And with my luck rolls, and with my luck rolls, you can also use luck points to kind of use to re-roll ones and do some other fun stuff. So every time he every time he rolls a 1, it's a 1 because he doesn't have the luck to change it. And we just got to the point where movement was important, and the guy who has a movement of 1 is trying to escape, except he can only run 3 meters. So the meeting that they're in is getting assaulted by an assault team, and this guy's trying to run away, and guess what? All the other players are running, 20 meters, while this guy is only running 3 meters. It's like
Running on crutches.
or
I mean,
a limp,
or like
something
my
else,
solution to this isn't perfect for getting rid of people using dump stats, but I do explicitly express that anything below anything 3 or below, and your character is like fucking handicapped in that stat.
Yeah.
If you've got a 1 in movement allowance, you're like wheelchair bound and not even like able to use your arms to get around. Like you're blowing into a tube to move forward.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize he had a MA of 1 until
Oh Lord!
until we were like doing the tactical map of, okay, you got, because we were on roll 20. It's like, okay, you move here. Okay, what's your movement? And he's like, a 1. I'm like, what? He's like, it's a 1.
You can't even stand up from the chair you're in.
I'll get there eventually. Hold on.
But
Drag yourself along the ground by your lips, like.
And of course, his background was he was from Orbit, so kind of makes sense that he probably had some
I mean, sure, that
bone
would make
mass
sense.
depletion.
Lower movement allowance, but a 1.
Yeah, well,
Character's like quadriplegic.
Yeah, 1 is just like, I really don't give a shit about this.
but I think the party now sees, oh shit, he's a liability because he just got tagged and bagged by the assault team.
Why the fuck are we hanging out with Limpy McShuffle here?
So that's also the fun thing when players A, don't talk amongst themselves, or B, decide, hey, you know what, I'm going to pump up these other stats and leave another stat bad. And there's one other character who has an attractiveness of 1, but that's only because he had an accident in his life path.
Okay.
I'll get that. Like you can play out like an attractiveness of 1. That, I mean, sure, you can do that, but everyone, like, people are gonna react to you. You are a fucking chud. You're like a burn victim. Like,
Yes.
Yeah,
And that's what he uses as his character portrait, is this guy with like burn scars all over his face.
yeah, you are what Wesley threatened to do with Humperdinck in in Princess Bride. Like children scream at the sight of you. Women cross the street. People react to you by like, "Dear God, what is that?"
Yeah, and I think that's
so
how.
do you give him his intimidation?
With Interlock Unlimited, that is a thing. Like the lower your attractiveness, you get a bonus to intimidation. You get a negative to seduction, but it works the other way around. The higher your attractiveness, you get a bonus to seduction. You get a negative to your intimidation because if you're a pretty boy, nobody thinks you can fight because, well, you look like you've never had your nose broken. So
Yep. So that's the one thing about power players is power players will do things like that in which they do a dump stat. And even though you present, and like I presented my luck rules of, hey, this is why luck is important. If you're going to ignore it, well, that's on you.
Yeah.
Or even, the movement, he assumed that MA didn't mean what it meant for whatever reason.
my favorite thing is players who forget to take swim as a skill. I love that.
I love players who don't take education. At least one.
Oh my God. Oh yeah. No, you can't read or write. You don't know what the fuck that sign says.
I will sell my soul to this corporation for 5 cents and put it in gold lettering, and they'll think it's awesome because they can't read it.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's get back to listen up, you prima screwheads. We have quite not even hit halfway mark. So chapter 4 is about cyberpunk sociology. This is the first chapter in which Mike Pondsmith makes an appearance, in which he talks about why he wrote cyberpunk and really gets into what he sees as the world, and kind of what's important in the world. And I think there's two other articles from Craig and Ross around. Basically, it's a chapter of atmosphere, really. Is what I got.
And it's good stuff. Like, I haven't always agreed with Mike's personal view of cyberpunk. Although I love the world he created, I love the game he created. His view of cyberpunk tends to lean heavily towards hyperbole. Like, but it's such a solid. His advice is so solid for creating atmosphere, for creating the world around your game. Like, it's hard not to just completely fall into it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I love it because the atmosphere is what separates cyberpunk from generalized science fiction. I mean, hell, when the term cyberpunk was coined, it was because it set itself apart from other science fiction, and the atmosphere is a huge part of that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's definitely a great chapter to read through, to at least get you in the mindset of what cyberpunk is. And I think it still holds kind of true today with a lot of this. Information is important in this world. Merging technology, making the hard choices, the man versus machine.
It lays out that at its heart, cyberpunk is very much, probably above everything else, it's very much about going against the corrupt establishment. Like, that is the heart of the cyberpunk movement. Using technology to do so, or maybe doing so in spite of technology. But at its heart, it's punk.
Yes, that's the word that a lot of people forget. Punk.
Yeah. Like, it always freaks me out that there are so many people who are into the cyberpunk genre who are totally on the side of, like, fascism and the establishment, and like they're just all about that. And it always like how can you read this material and come away with that viewpoint? It's like people who read like superhero comics and are racist.
Yeah.
Like or misogynist. I don't know how you can do that.
The cult of Punisher is what I call them.
See, and even the Punisher, like even the creators of the Punisher, like actively speak against that kind of bullshit, but they just still eat it up, like cops and their thin blue line bullshit. And that is not to say that I have anything against cops as a whole, but any cop who like has the Punisher symbol like emblazoned on their car or as a tattoo probably shouldn't be a cop.
Probably not.
Just like Frank Castle.
Yeah.
All right.
Speaking of and the movement, there are so many games that I've seen where the team is being hired by the establishment, a corporation, to go against another corporation, and that's fine, but you're still working for the corporation, and you're supposed to punk.
See, when it comes to individual games, I'm okay with that. I mean, Ghost in the Shell, all those characters are definitely working for the establishment. It's still valid cyberpunk. And they still, within that system, they try to buck the fascist authoritarianism that's going on. Like, you can have that. RoboCop was a fucking cop, but like, you can't tell me that RoboCop wasn't cyberpunk. And you can't
Oh,
tell me Murphy himself most definitely was anti-authoritarianism. Like he fought OCP and he fought, the corrupt city hall and all that shit. Like that's what it's about.
and that's awesome, changing the system from inside. But these guys aren't trying to change anything. They're just grabbing cash and moving on.
And to me, honestly, that's valid to me as well. I've run plenty of campaigns where the game just takes place in that world. It doesn't, like, your personal games don't necessarily have to revolve around that rebellion.
Oh yeah, not 24.
Like you can play evil characters in Dungeons and Dragons. That doesn't mean it's any less Dungeons and Dragony. It's just not what the game itself is about. That you can make it about something else is fine, but it's not. You don't present that as, well, Dungeons and Dragons is about being an evil knight who goes around raping and pillaging everything. That's not what it's about. Just because you can do that, it doesn't invalidate the game. It just means
Right.
You're playing outside the boundaries.
And Mike Pondsmith has often said of late, cyberpunk isn't about this or that. It's about saving yourself.
I think that's my favorite Pondsmith quote, honestly.
So you could be working for a corporation. You could be part of the whole corporate mechanism, but really, are you saving your own self for your own humanity? And I've put players in very awkward positions, and what their choices are. Are they going to listen to the paycheck that they're going to get, or are they going to listen to their own honor, their own, creed of what they're willing to do for money versus what they're not going to do, and then buck against the system.
Exactly. And every now and then, everybody wants to step outside the norm. They want to get a little bit of strange, as it were.
Yep. So moving on, we're on chapter 5, which I believe is I think there's 11 chapters in this. Could be wrong. 9, 10. No, there's 10 chapters. So we're at the halfway point. So chapter 10 or chapter 5 is, I think, the longest chapter, and it's written mostly by Eric. I don't think there's any other authors in there. No, there isn't. And the chapter's heading is Cyberpunk Combat, or Combat in Cyberpunk, Running Combat in Cyberpunk.
Okay,
Craig Sheely.
Yeah, Craig Sheely. And he just goes into combat tactics of the real world and how to use them in the cyberpunk world. And I think this is where I think it gets into the whole adversarial GM kind of point of view.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to some extent, but I think what he's trying to say with this chapter, I mean, with Cyberpunk, there are very few games, especially in the 90s, where real world, like, actual combat tactics, we're not talking about like battlefield drawn on a map type shit, but we're talking about like small unit tactics. There were very few games back then that could actively reflect that. There was Cyberpunk, there was GURPS, Cyberpunk, GURPS, and
Twilight 2000.
To some extent, Vampire the Masquerade.
Twilight 2000.
Yeah. Because of the way damage and actions were handled in those games, they modeled... Yeah, Twilight 2000, that probably falls in there, that whole line. Because of the way damage and combat were handled with those games, it presented a much more realistic philosophy to combat than most games and most gamers were used to. This is really where that whole hit point argument comes in. And this chapter was kind of necessary for running Cyberpunk, especially to people who were coming in from games like Dungeons and Dragons or Rifts, where you just had just ungodly amounts of hit points and could take so much fucking damage before anything actually affected you. Where this like impresses upon you the need, if you're in combat, cover is key. Making quick movements and picking your targets carefully. These are key aspects. Aiming is important. It's weird that this whole chapter basically gets thrown out for Red, it seems like.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be important for the modern gamer, I guess you would say, to have that lesson, which is what actually part of what attracted me to it.
Yeah, me too.
Compared to this, my gaming career started off with Marvel superheroes, so of course completely unrealistic there, but it was fun, don't get me wrong. But when I came down to Earth with Cyberpunk, and it's like, oh, okay, this is something I can wrap my head around.
Exactly. It's a completely different philosophy, and it was important to express that.
And I think this chapter is also not only for GMs, but I think it's also for players.
100%. In fact, it might be more for players, because by the time the GM finishes reading the rest of the book, that philosophy will be ingrained into him anyway.
Yep.
But this section for players is almost must read itself, because it will impress on players just how dangerous this combat system is, and how different it is from the games they might have been playing up till now.
Yeah, and I think I like in this particular section they have a section called Grace Under Fire, in which they give an optional rule for, hey, if you're under fire, start making a cool roll against the difficulty. If you plan on firing back, or you plan on trying to do anything that takes you in the line of fire.
That is some gospel right there. Woe to any player who makes cool their dump stat.
Did you guys ever check out the combat experience modifier from the original Cyberpunk 1.0?
2013? Yeah.
Yeah, a very similar thing, which I guess they revamped for this one. But if you're not a combat type character, bullets flying around you, you're not going to be strolling around doing this and that as if, oh, I'm fine, I'm cool. No, you're terrified.
You're going to be in the corner shitting yourself, fucking like eyes closed, pulling the blanket over your head like, dear God, make it stop.
Exactly, and that's why they simplified it here by just adding a minus.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Let the player roleplay that shit get out as long as they do so.
Yes.
And
it's a pretty achievable score, like 15, 14, 15, something like that. Okay, you didn't roll it, so now you're too scared to move.
Yeah.
And that's logical.
It's totally logical. It makes complete sense. Like anybody who's there's a reason that when some shit jumps off, people panic. That's what happens in real life. People fucking panic unless you're trained not to. Unless you have been in the situation. It's not even training, it's experience.
And that's why in the original 2013 they call it combat experience modifier.
Yeah. And I actually addressed this with I hate to keep pimping no, I don't hate it. I love pimping Interlock Unlimited, don't let me lie to you. But we addressed this in Interlock Unlimited with the idea that, if your character, the more your character sees combat, regardless of their personal of whatever their primary role is, eventually you will start earning points into combat sense. You will become a combat veteran if you're constantly around when bullets are flying. Even if you don't fire a shot yourself, you get better at it. You get calmer, you get more able to react under fire.
And I'll give you a great example, and using myself as the example. I was playing paintball. This guy had like a quarter acre. He set up his own course. And my heart's just pounding as these little paintballs are splattering around me. And these weren't even bullets.
Yep.
And I'm just quick breathing and And this was just paintball, so I can only imagine when it's a life and death situation and bullets are whizzing past you at twice the speed of sound. Yeah, you're not going to be Mr. Cool, Calm, and Collected. Sorry.
Yep.
I mean, at the very least, here's personal experience from me. Like, you can react like you don't know what the fuck's going on in the first place. I was way back in the 90s. I was living in Kansas City, working at a haunted house, and it was after work one night down underneath the 12th Street Bridge, which I don't know if any of our listeners know Kansas City at all, especially during the 90s, but underneath the 12th Street Bridge in Kansas City at like 3 o'clock in the morning on a Friday night was probably not the safest place to just be hanging out after work smoking. But we're sitting there, me and a group of the people I work with, just hanging out, decompressing, and all of a sudden we hear some pops, and like the brick wall next to us like kind of explodes a little bit. And instead of panicking, instead of like diving for cover, we're just looking around like, what the fuck was that? When what we really should have been doing was taking cover and getting the fuck out of there. Yep. Like, it didn't dawn on us till like 30 seconds later that somebody was shooting at us.
That is something that happens also. You know, instead of the exclamation point above the character's head, they get the question mark.
Yeah, like, what the fuck was that? Like, I mean, it takes training to be able to react in a logical way when shit hits the fan.
Yeah, and they've done studies in which most humans, when they hear loud sounds or something like that,
they get up and look.
Yeah, they get up and look around and aren't known to be like, oh shit, something's happening.
Look out the window and see if anything interesting is happening.
Exactly. But yeah, I think the one part of that optional rule that I think they missed was the combat sense should be added as well. But I think as a referee, you would be intelligent enough to know that, that definitely applies.
Yeah.
We're getting short on time, so kind of going to jump through some of these chapters pretty quick. Chapter 6 goes into... What's that?
Are we getting... Oh, man.
Yeah.
I guess that has been an hour.
Time flies.
Tonight is fun. I like tonight.
Damn it.
We might run over a little, but let's at least try to keep it within reason. So, chapter 6, we get into fleshing out of the life path, and this chapter I think has 2 or 3 of the authors. The first one is, of course, Mike Pondsmith, in which he introduced plot path, which is kind of an interesting concept and mechanism to kind of flesh out kind of a subplot, right? Based upon, and again, this would target a specific character. I'm sorry, you didn't come in.
Phil, you're kind of turning into a Robo-Phil right there.
Oh, sorry. I was saying that's the one I haven't read in a number of years, so I'm just going to have to, ride on your coattails for this one.
Right. I mean, basically, it's just life path that happens currently.
Yep.
Okay.
It's fantastic. It's got a giant chart.
Oh, yes.
That just lets you plot out, events that'll happen in your game. It's good stuff. Especially when you want to get a little bit lazy and just feel like, sometimes I just want some random shit to happen. Can't all be connected.
Yep. And again, this chapter... Go ahead.
Exam.
Say that again?
Say it again, Phil.
I said, I'm glad this is an open book exam.
Yes, it is. So I think this chapter mostly dives into how you can leverage life path and other types of ways in which you can bring character history to the character or make make situations happen to specific characters within the game. Another concept I think that's kind of reiterated throughout here is the concept of blue booking, which I don't think is too prevalent nowadays.
No, Blue booking is a great idea, but I think it might be asking more of the players than.
You might get lucky and have that one player who loves doing that sort of thing. And I had
Yeah.
one guy like my Marvel superheroes game. But outside of that, most people don't want bookkeeping. They don't want to bother with it.
No, it's like you may get that one player who really likes making out the maps in Dungeons and Dragons. Do they even do that anymore? I remember when I like it with AD&D, like it was a big deal for there to be a player like making the maps.
Yep.
But that's a skill set for a very specific type of player, and it's not something that like they tried to make me do that once, and I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this at all.
Well, with the advent of,
I appreciate the guy who does, but I'm no good at that.
Yeah, I think the map maker kind of slowly disappeared with final maps, and
Yeah.
and then of course getting into the virtual tabletops and the capability there of showing maps. But like for blue booking, yeah, just rewriting a character's history is not something I've ever encountered from my players. Right? I've had players.
Well, I mean, there's the flashback where you like basically retcon your character.
Yep.
Which I don't want that. I don't personally. I hate retcons. I hate prequels. Even if the prequel turns out to be good, it's still disappointing to me that it's a prequel. But blue booking, that's basically just keeping track of what your character is doing in the off time, and I'm cool with that. It's very rare you meet a player who's going to want to. One, who's going to want to do all that homework, and two, is going to understand what the framework is going to be. Like half the time, if you get a player who does want to do that, suddenly their character shows up to the game with all this fantastic stuff going on, and like, oh, I met this rich heiress, and she's gonna buy me all this shit. And like, no, she's not.
Yeah, I had a character in my current campaign. The player had to change out that character who had a love affair with a rich heiress, and I'm like, sure. There was other complications behind the scenes, which was never revealed to that character, but is probably going to be revealed to the other team as things unfold. I don't want to get too into it because, my players might be listening.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, there is a very distinct and real correlation between the guys who want a blue book and the guys who want to min-max their characters.
Yeah.
It's whereas the players that I find that are the most creative, they want to do that shit in game. They don't want to write essays about it.
Yeah, and I think this chapter is another chapter that probably could be shared with players, because it gives some.
I mean, it's
good.
I was just gonna say it's great advice. It's a great idea. It's a fantastic concept. It's just expecting a little too much from players, I think.
Yeah, and for me, at the end of the chapter, where is it Ross who wrote this section? I think it was Ross. Yeah,
Spike writes a big long section in this, and it's all good stuff.
In which he gives a sample character. He writes out, of course, the character's stats and stuff like that, but then he expands upon the life path and kind of writes a one-page novel of the guy, his history, goes into motivations, and kind of fleshes out a lot more of those other life path events like clothing, hair. He kind of uses full form sentences than just short and spiky. And gives a little more description to every point.
He impresses upon the reader the importance of detail, not just like getting a fuller glimpse of who your character is, why he's doing what he's doing, as opposed to just quick, easy dice results.
Yep.
And
And I like that because it stops characters from going to do a Leroy Jenkins every session.
which is funny because he names his character, his sample character, Leary, which is as close to Leroy as it gets, really.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's exactly that, and it has informed my philosophies towards character creation since the moment I read it, both as a GM and as a player.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So it's definitely a chapter I would definitely share with players also. I don't consider it. And again, that's one of the problems with this particular book is great advice for GMs, great advice for players as well. The next chapter is working with the fringe characters, in which they kind of, the various authors, and I think 3 of them or 4 of them, have sections in which what they consider fringe characters, right? Whether it's
Right.
the rocker boy, corporate, techie, med tech, media,
And Netrunner.
and netrunner.
At least that's Spike's chapter.
Yeah, and I think with Eric's chapter, Eric Heiserer, yeah. So
I said it.
I think the one thing I liked about his section was he talked about the fringe characters, the rocker, the corporate, techie, netrunner, but he also gave in to, hey, these are the different types of characters that you could play, right? For example, the rocker being a brain dance starter, or the corporate being the team financer, and kind of gives them more of a role that could fit within the team if you're running, for example, a infiltration team or black ops, gray ops team.
This is something I love everything about this chapter. I love each of the authors' perspectives. I like how Benjamin just talks about all the classes. But we've talked about this kind of thing many times. The two of us will. Some characters just kind of the game kind of has to revolve around them to some extent.
Yep.
A rocker doesn't work in a campaign where everybody else is like a hardcore professional. They just well, what's he gonna do? But if the rocker is the center of that campaign, then you can fit pretty much everybody around them.
And you can take one session where it's all about the rocker and everybody's orbiting around that, but then, hey, my roadie, his girlfriend just got kidnapped by the biker gang, and now it's circling around him. The rocker is still involved because he's friends with the roadie.
Yeah.
But that way, everybody gets peace.
Now, this really only matters in the term of long-term campaigns, which is, anything. A lot of people will classify a long-term campaign as anything over 4 sessions. I mean, for me, campaigns last years. They last until people get tired of playing them. But if you're running a one-shot, it doesn't matter what the characters are. You can find some premise for them all to get together and work together.
It's the one shooting people. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. You can squeeze other characters into other games. Like if you're running a group of professional edge runners, it would make sense to have a corporate representative there, maybe not going on missions with you, but somebody's got to represent your monetary interests. Your fixer gets you the jobs, but who's going to procure travel for you and all that? Cops can be difficult to include in games, especially because if they're an actual cop, that means they're going to a job. They've got to answer to the law. They've got, their 9 to 5 to go to. They can't be just running around willy-nilly with a group of professionals, especially if they're a uniform cop. If they're a detective, they've got a little bit more leeway. There are ways around it. You could just say they're undercover, blah, 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 but even still.
And I think that's why it's
they've got,
important to stress to the group before they even roll out characters of what kind of
yeah,
campaign you have in mind. You know.
exactly.
Well, that
And,
goes back to the top. It says set the tone, or set the, and let the players know what they should be expecting.
communication. It's important to, like, group cohesion. That's why it's so important for the GM to be part of the character creation process, to help ensure that there is cohesion, that these characters can work together. Uh, Will, the Nomad game I'm running you on, I told you that originally I tried to run that with a different group, and as you've seen, it's a pretty highly social game.
Yep.
But that first group, every single one of the players, like, their characters were all like these antisocial, kill them all and leave them to the cockroaches people. It was impossible for me to run the same campaign, so
Right.
I just abandoned it and started over with you guys.
Yeah. So it sounds like that group was more Raven Shiv than us trying to eke out a normal.
It's
society.
not even that they were Raph and Shiv. It's just that they didn't want to talk to any of the NPCs. They didn't care about anything.
Yeah.
It just, and that was my fault. I was really loose and not as participatory in the character creation process as I normally am, and it bit me in the ass.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I am so very adamant about being part of helping the players, like running the player's life path for them and all that. Like,
Yep.
it's a collaborative process for me.
Right, it's as it should be. Just rolling your life path is good, but when you have that GM player exchange, you come up with something even better. Like one player I had, well, somebody's out to kill you. Well, we figured out it was his uncle who was gonna kill him because he has an inheritance coming that he doesn't know about yet. But
See, that's good stuff right there.
we're just gonna kill him off just so he never finds out, and I'll inherit the money after him. But thank you.
And it was a big problem with the original Cyberpunk 2020 rules, and I guess Red addressed it somewhat, but there were so many character classes, and again, we've talked about this before, that were dependent on being employed for their abilities to work. Like a cop, if he wasn't actually like employed by the police force, he was useless. Same with a corporate. Like, they lose their perks of the job when they don't have a job. And that was one of the first things that Interlock Unlimited tried to address, is making these characters still valid, even if they were freelance, or even if they got fired for whatever reason.
Yep.
Now
Like
you said that's what this.
I'm sorry?
You said Red tries to address this.
Red addresses it more than the original rules did, for sure.
Okay.
Right. I think Red addressed special abilities and not being as vague as Cyberpunk 2020 when it came to the mechanics of how special abilities should work.
I mean,
for me, the only two real character special abilities that in the base game had mechanics that worked were combat sense and interface, right? And it wasn't until Wildside that you saw mechanics on how to use Street Deal.
Exactly. I mean, to this day, you're not going to find any two GMs who agree on what the Cyberpunk 2020 charismatic leadership is actually supposed to do.
Or authority.
Or authority, Jesus Christ.
So.
But yeah. And when it comes to Netrunners, I mean, 2020, they even talk about it in the book. We just, like, who was it? Like, they even state there that Netrunners are just ridiculously hard to incorporate as a PC. They required the player and the GM to learn a completely different rule set just for that character class, and that was always that is perhaps the biggest and most long-running criticism of Cyberpunk 2020.
Yep.
Is the yeah.
But that's why people love the red net running system, or as I like to call it, Life and Death Pokemon Go. And
I like that.
thank you. And so yeah, it's so simple now, but they curtailed it where you have to now be within, what did you say, 6 meters,
Yep.
Yeah.
something like that.
But even
So
even Cyberpunk Red really reminded me of Cyberpunk 2013 and how the net kind of was made, or the net rules were made for that. You know.
Yeah, it's really weird that, 2013 and 2020, they were both written before the internet was really a thing. Back when it was just, dial-up BBSs and stuff like that. There was no internet as we know it today.
right.
And it's weird to me that with our understanding of how the internet works and what it is and how monolithic it is, with Red, they decided to go even weirder with it than the 2013, 2020 version, where now it's all done on the spot. And I cannot wrap my head around how trade is and international commerce is supposed to work in the time of the Red.
Well,
Thank you. It's just like, okay, you destroyed the internet. Okay, I'm in Boston and I need to get something to a guy in California or buy something from. Oh, well, my signal only goes to the end of the block.
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Call me crazy.
back to this supplement. The next chapter, chapter 8, is Cyberpunk Campaign Street or Skyscraper. And again, I think this is another very juicy chapter for referees on how to structure your campaigns. It even goes into atmosphere and kind of is a culmination of a lot of the previous chapters. Ideas
Exactly.
and kind of reinforcing that.
I mean, it gets into the heart of what it gets to the very heart of what you want your campaign to be, and like getting everybody on the same page.
Yep.
I can't stress enough how important that is. That everyone understands, okay, this is going to be everybody, you guys are going to be gutter punks, living hand to mouth, day by day, scraping by on what you can, living by on what you can scrape out of dumpsters or steal from others. Life is a constant struggle, or you guys are professionals living the high life.
Yeah, and each author has a different take on
clothes.
that.
Yeah.
And of course, this harks back to Phil's comment around the film style of your game, anime versus the cinema verte versus film noir, and how to run those.
Yeah. Is your game going to be high action? Is it going to be more cerebral, or more investigative? Are you running? Yeah.
Right. I've always had an idea about running an all corporate game, but in that version, I would see it more as a Vampire the Masquerade game where there's a lot of backstabbing, insider trading, not a lot of open combat, but a lot of, as you say, cerebral role playing. It's like, I want to get rid of that guy, but I just can't have somebody blow up his car because everybody knows I hate him. So
Exactly.
finding out a way to get at him without showing my hand.
Yeah, I like that idea, the concept of Vampire the Masquerade, except it's a corporate setting. Like that's a neat idea. I like that.
Thank you.
Malkavians are what? Militech?
Shit, Malkavians, fucking internet influencers.
Yeah.
They're the crazy fuckers just making money doing whatever nonsense pops into their head.
Yeah.
Like selling farts in a jar.
The one
Farts in
thing,
a jar.
yeah.
I'm gonna sell my dirty bathwater.
And the one thing from this chapter that I have constantly used, who was this author? Scroll. Might have been Ross. Yeah, Ross. So at the end of the chapter, he goes into the different types of characters for your game, right? A mover versus an operator versus heroic versus super heroic. And he like kind of gives you, hey, this is the type of character it is. These are the stat points you're looking for. These are the skill points you probably should assign. The special ability should equal this. This is how much money they should have, and the rep is this. And I still use those templates today to kind of set my characters, or my NPCs, I should say, when I create them.
And that's what makes this book so beautiful. Is anyone listening is like, this book was printed in the 90s, and yet Will and others like us are still using them in the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
Yep.
It ages very well.
Anything
It
else
does.
from this chapter you guys want to talk about?
And we kind of ranted enough to cover the whole, what kind of game you're running thing. So we don't need to go back over that other than to say, I love this chapter. I think it's penultimately important, both for players and GMs. Yeah,
Okay.
it's
And of course, the next to last chapter is the one that I think not a lot of people like, which is Down and Dirty with Mike Pondsmith.
Yeah,
And I
Uncle
think
Mike's dirty tricks.
This
is my biggest point of contention with the book. Is as entertaining as it is to read, I don't know. It's caused such a problem for me.
I don't have that much of a problem with it, simply because, let's say, going back to our D&D player example, they're used to traps and booby traps and mazes, and this is great because, okay, here's something you're familiar with, or some style that you're familiar with, and now go survive this trap that you're going to go walking through, and you pick it right from this section of the book.
That's not really the advice that I have the problem with. My problem is when he starts talking about really playing dirty against the players. The thing is, there are things, for a role-playing game to work, there are things that the PCs can get away with that if you want to keep your players, NPCs cannot do.
Of course.
If you have a player who wants to, set up a mile away from a target and snipe them, and take them out in one shot before they even know they've been attacked, that can happen. Like, the player can do that, or the PC can do that. If an NPC does that to a player, like you're just walking along the street and suddenly your character's head explodes, that's not good role playing. That's the GM being a dick. If you have no course of defense.
Yeah, so I think the specific section you hate in this particular chapter is how to kill the toughest solo.
Oh yeah,
in which he fleshes out how to kill your players quickly and efficiently.
It's hilarious to read. It's entertaining, but it sets up precedent for a relationship between the GM and the players that is just toxic. And I'll die on that hill. As much as I love Mike, as much as entertaining as it is to read, like these problems with the power players, the problem players could be solved. Like, this is such a passive aggressive way of dealing with a problem that I don't see it solving a problem as much as making the problem worse.
Right.
Okay.
Like, even if it didn't happen to me, if I'm walking down the street next to another PC and like a air conditioner falls out of the sky and kills that PC dead, even if it didn't happen to me, I'm done with that game.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I still hate, to this day, I will always argue with the person who ran the game, in which he basically put player against players, and half the players didn't know the other players were attacking or going to attack them. And basically the GM gave one side a lot more power than the other, and kind of helped them. And it was a slaughter, right? And to me, it's
Yeah,
like,
of course.
this is not fun. So even a game that was played back in the 80s, I still remember very vividly being like, this, the GM fucked us. And he used other players to do it. And that, again, yes, it definitely can leave a long, sour bitterness in your mouth long after the fact. But I think there's, other points in this chapter. And again, I wouldn't throw away the whole chapter.
No, of course not.
Because there is some definite advice, like making sure your enemies play smart, and how certain NPCs you want to try to keep alive as long as possible as a baddie. And then just, always keep players on their toe to a point, right? I mean, that's always a good thing, but you shouldn't necessarily directly harm them. Like, for me, I like to harm the characters' family, their friends, the people around them, right? To cause them more misery than doing any physical attack against them.
Kill the wife and kids to Piedmont. That's what's going on.
Now, when you kill the characters, then you just, you attack the character, you just make them mad. But when you make them mad, but you make them scared that now you have to protect these people. I mean, I can protect myself, I'm fine, but I have to protect these people, which is a whole lot harder because, they're different individuals, and I'm just a single person. I can lock myself in a closet.
Yeah, I mean, I can keep my eyes on them, but that means I can't do anything else.
Right.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like you said, there is some great advice in this chapter. Give them what they want, take it away. I mean, to a limited extent, that's great advice. You don't want to do it every time. You don't want to do it with everything, because then what's the point of playing?
Right.
Making them responsible for their actions, that's fantastic advice. Like, their actions having consequences should be at the heart of everything that they do.
Yep.
Letting them understand that there are things worse than death for their characters. That's good stuff. It's just really that one section, the whole, dealing with problem players. Like, that's really the only part of the book, the only part of.
Or here's how to kill your characters.
Yeah, like, I don't need advice on how to kill characters. I can kill characters if I want to just be a dick. I mean, elephant falls out of the sky. There's no difference between that and the I'm going to put a landmine under your mattress thing that he's describing in the book.
Yep.
It's the same thing.
Well, like I said, that harkens back to, okay, you kill the character you have access to every weapon in the universe. Well, yippee.
I mean, you have access to the universe itself.
Right. That's what I said.
At that point, your Agent Smith making Neo like his nose and mouth no longer exist. He's slowly suffocating in front of you, and he can do nothing about it.
Right.
And
So
I
That
think,
sure was an awesome game. Thanks.
and I think that's
I
where
can't wait to play with you again. Never.
the misconception of overpowered player or overpowered characters can happen. And one of the criticisms I think for Cyberpunk 2020, I've never really had an issue because there's always something that's going to be overpowered, and as a GM, you always have that tool, and you can always rein it in as well. Whether the players like it or not is another matter.
As a GM, like you said, I've never really had a problem with overpowered players. I mean, at least not with Cyberpunk. It just sure they can get the best equipment and they can armor themselves up really good. There are ways around all that shit. And if they're constantly, they can't carry around a fucking antimatter rifle on their back and be invited into, the fancy restaurant. They can't be wearing powered armor and be allowed into the nightclub. Like I don't understand how this ever really became a problem for people.
I think because most people run their game as combat, and when you have where there's no social skills that are actually important, guys are going to pick solos, armor them up, and then they become a problem because your only style of GMing requires people to be vulnerable, and these guys aren't.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it also boils down to, again, people coming in from playing Dungeons and Dragons and other like more prototypical role-playing games where, nobody's keeping track of just all the crap that a player might be carrying around with them at any given moment.
Yeah, and you always can put your players in a position where you're not necessarily taking the stuff permanently away from them, but you're temporary. Like, in order for you to enter this club, guess what? You get a weapons scan. They remove all your weapons. Okay.
Yeah, that's a standard. That's a standard in my game. If you
go, that's every nightclub you ever go into. They're not going to let you walk in carrying weapons. You're going to be drinking. You don't want drunk people with guns.
And I have a current rule that says any SP over 14 that you're wearing, people can consider it combat gear, and some places aren't going to allow you to wear it inside their facilities. So check yourself at the door.
I mean, it goes against cyberpunk canon, but in my game, like fairly realistic rules towards firearms or fairly realistic laws like concurrent with today exist. Like without special gun dealer license, you cannot legally get a hold of fully automatic weapons, which is not going to happen.
And that's where the Protect and Serve comes in, and to a lesser extent, the Interface magazine, which focuses on cops.
Yeah.
There's things in the universe you can use to legitimately tell these players, no, you can't have that, or no, you can't carry that.
Yeah. I mean, or you can carry it, but every single cop you come across is going to immediately stop you and question you. Security is going to flag you immediately. Like, even if you're just walking by a building, they're going to be like, oh my God, look at what that guy's doing. People are going to cross the street to avoid you. You're not going to be moving inconspicuously.
Yep. So there's always ways to curtail any player who gets out of control with in-game, situations. So
exactly.
So now we're on to the last chapter, or at least the chapter before it gets in. So the last chapter is actually the bios around the various authors throughout the book. But chapter 10 I consider the last chapter, which is the introduction of new rules to the game.
Yep.
So the first is High Noon Shootout. I tried using this for a couple games. The one thing I liked about it was that even low caliber weapons still cause bruise damage. if you were
Yep.
wearing soft armor. So, you know, a point here and a point there can add up very
Adds
quickly.
up.
So,
And the thing they had in the original 2013, they had concussive rules or blunt trauma rules,
yep,
Yeah.
which made complete sense. Okay, yes, that bullet will not penetrate my armor, but it will hurt like a ucker once it hits me.
yep. And the only reason why I kind of stopped using it is because of the conversion that was constant. You know.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to use these rules all the time. It's just, it adds a lot of bookkeeping. But there are situations where it's going to be appropriate, and you're going to want these rules in your pocket as a tool. Uh, and they're good. I mean, they're solid rules. Getting hit getting hit, even if it doesn't penetrate, that it hurts.
Yep.
It
Yeah,
fucking hurts. Um,
and that's why we use that cool rule, that difficulty 14, 15 rule, where damn, that hurts. I don't like that. Let me run away because yeah, it didn't kill me, but I don't want that to happen again.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was actually thinking, and I kind of got the idea from Cyberpunk Red to apply to 2020, in which if for damage you roll 2d6 or 2 6s in the damage, you know, you're taking 1 bruise point.
Yep.
If you're for well, it depends upon the caliber and of course the armor type, but if you roll 2 6s, you're taking some blunt damage, whether it penetrates or not. So I kind of like that little bit of a rule versus what Red does with the critical.
Yeah.
Oh,
Robble.
The next rule was the detailed explosions, which I still use to this day.
Absolutely. I converted that almost whole hog into the base interlock unlimited stuff.
Yeah, I think even if you don't care about how to make campaigns or whatever, just this one section is worth the money to buy this book.
Yeah.
And then Saturday Night Slugfest, which kind of gets into new types of mostly martial arts attacks.
It's the middle section between the core 2020 martial arts and then the revamped martial arts from Pac Rim. But it introduces the idea that not every attack has to be life or death. You can make a knockout attack, or if you get an opponent down, you can make a coup de grace to just end the fight immediately.
Yep.
I very much like the Saturday Night Slugfest ideas. I very much included them both when I first redid the when I made my original expanded martial arts list, and then again when I updated it, and then when I made it for Interlock Unlimited, I incorporated this stuff into it like almost whole hog.
Yep. And then the 2 other sections.
Plus it gives us like 4 new martial arts, which
the Kung
are all
Fu
good
I
stuff.
liked.
They're all very unique.
Yeah, the Kung Fu one of my players really liked. And to me,
who would?
yeah, exactly, the Equilibrium. I think didn't this come out before Equilibrium?
Oh, by like a decade.
I don't know about a decade, but
well, I don't know. It felt like a decade, but it probably was only like 5 years. Originally, when it came out, it was supposed to replicate like John Woo, Chow Yun Fat, blah 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 blah, like point blank fucking gun shooting, two-fisted awesomeness.
And of course, the last 2 pages of this chapter, which I find kind of funny that they would even think about adding something like this when the game was still in its infancy, is Beyond Basic Skills, which listed all the skills from supplements up to that point in time and the complete role list,
Oh Lord.
which, you know, was also another kind of funny thing. And even with the complete role list, they didn't have all the roles. Did
No.
did
But I mean, they
anything?
included stuff from the interfaces. They didn't get the
Yeah.
stuff from the Punk 21s. Um,
Well, also like all the media from Jesus Christ, Live and Direct.
I
Yeah.
don't think Live and Direct was out at the
Yeah,
time.
that's another thing. Was there's a lot more source books that came out
I,
that expanded these
I
lists.
want to say it
So
was 3 years after this that Live and Direct came out, maybe 4.
yeah, so for me to
But
have them publish these two lists was kind of funny in that they weren't done yet.
I mean, most of these roles.
Hmm?
Honestly, looking at this role is why I decided to just revamp how they work in Interlock Unlimited, because most of them are fairly redundant.
Hmm.
And they're just mixing the roles together at that point. And my philosophy was, instead of doing this, why not just let them like mix and match the roles as they see fit?
Yep. Oh wow, Equilibrium came out 2002, so it was 8 years. Thank you, Aaron
Yeah.
Duran. So that's it for Listen Up, You Primitive Screwheads.
I kind of like prowlers though.
I mean, yeah, I do too. But you know what? With Interlock Unlimited, I'm not sorry to keep pimping it, but I'm gonna pimp it. That's what I do. You can create that prowler. Like, that's actually, thief is its own role there. But yeah.
Yeah, and FYI to everybody who's listening, one of our future episodes is going to be an AMA of the Interlock Unlimited with
Yep.
Wisdom here. He's going to answer any questions around that system.
I will.
So maybe we can get Seth Sirkowski to join us, because I know he loves your system.
That would be fun. We need to ask him the questions about Ravagers and Hollow Men at the same time. In another future episode, we're going to be doing the same thing with Will's applications for the game.
Yep.
Very much looking forward to that.
That's another plan. We're also looking to get more guests this year to join us. Phil, of course, you're always welcome to pop in at any time.
Thank you.
So that offer's open. And like I said, we're going to continue to do similar shows on this, in which we take a book and we'll break it down into our analysis of it, what was good, what was bad, what was useful, and what we kind of still use today. I think we started with the best of the best, and I think it might be all downhill from here.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily. We've still got some good stuff out there, but we definitely covered the best rules system out there, period. Or the best rules explanation, GM guide, blah, blah, blah. Right off the bat. You're right. I mean, it's... Yeah.
If you don't have any idea how to run a cyberpunk game, buy this book or get the PDF or whatever format it is in the new modern age.
Hell, if you don't know how to run a game, period, but get this book. It'll teach you.
Yep. All right. Anything else you guys want to talk about before we wrap it up?
Just thank you, everybody, for showing up. We're looking forward to this season. We are hoping to have a much more structured format than we did last season, where we just kind of
came up with a topic off the top of our heads for the night.
Almost on the spot.
Also like to thank Cyber Nation Uncensored for hosting us, as usual.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Please, everyone, we're looking for even more listener interaction. If you have any questions, you can submit them here on the Datafortress2020 Facebook group, on Discord at Cybernation Uncensored. We've got our own little section there. Or you can email Will or myself directly.
Yep.
Our email addresses are readily available at our sites, or I can just give it to you now, wisdom000@gmail.com. Will?
Cybersmily at cybersmily.net.
Well,
Short and simple.
I think that about covers everything for this episode.
Yep. All right.
Yep.
So we'll talk to you guys the first Wednesday of next month, which I believe might be in 2 weeks. So enjoy your night.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Yep. Good night, all.